Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Made in New England interview series, where we talk with New England-based companies and the people who lead them. I'm your host, Steve DeVries, and today I'm joined by a special guest named Daniel Theobald, we're going to describe him as a serial robotics entrepreneur. He's located in Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to talk about all of the different things that Daniel has going on in his professional life. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me.
All right. So Daniel, you and I just had a chat to get to know each other a little bit, and you have quite the activity list going on. You are president and co-founder of Mass Robotics, which is a nonprofit industry association for robotics. You are founder, chairman, and chief innovation officer of Vecna Robotics, which I believe you said is a robotics company for um, pallet loaders and things of that nature.
Yeah, world leader in autonomous forklifts.
Okay. I see here a company called Twisted Fields, which is robotics in agriculture.
Yeah, we're doing an open source farming robot as part of Twisted Fields.
Amazing. And then lastly, you have your robotics consulting business called Mechable.
Yeah, mechable stands for mechanizable. It's my favorite word. A lot of people, I think, use the word automation a lot. I prefer the word mechanization because it sort of separates robotics in the physical world from, sort of purely software automations. So something to be mechanizable is really about the combination of mechanical systems and software, allowing you to do things that are more efficient, help empower workers to be more efficient than ever before.
So clearly you have this passion for robotics. You have all of these different entities that you have founded or lead. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about where that passion for robotics came from.
It's an interesting question, Steve. I often wonder that myself. And I think that uh, for me, engineering and design has always been, the thing I like to do. If I have free time, I'm thinking about solving some problem and solving a problem, with a combination of mechanical, electrical, software systems. And I guess, as I thought about it, robotics is kind of the ultimate engineering endeavor in a sense. With robotics, we're combining all of these different engineering disciplines and really trying to do something really difficult, which is emulate human levels of capability, right? Robotics is typically differentiated from other things in that we're typically trying to do something that humans did, whether it's, assembling something or moving something or driving a car, whatever it is. And so it's really hard, I guess, is the short version of that. Robotics is really, really, really hard. Everything has to work, your mechanical systems, your electrical systems, your software, your AI, your machine vision, the list goes on and on. And it's just such a rich and creative area. I think that's one of the reasons I love it so much. And more than anything, I think it's given me a real appreciation for how amazing human beings are. I tell people that until you've tried to build a robot that does something a human does, you don't really appreciate how absolutely phenomenally capable human beings are. Even a child has far more ability than, the coolest robot that we've got out there yet today. And so it's just really humbling to try and build a system that emulates some of what humans are able to do.
Yeah, humans are the ultimate engineered entity. Yeah.
Yeah, and we learn more about humans by building these machines, and we're learning a lot about the mind and AI and all that type of stuff is a really hot topic right now. But even just the dexterity of the human hand, still roboticists haven't really come close to mimicking that in any real way.
So with all these different ventures, I'm looking at your at your LinkedIn profile right now, you've got these 4 different organizations that you've started throughout the last 9 or 10 years. So, what would you say you can attribute your success or your ability to be able to continue to start these organizations? What's driving that?
I think that the number one thing that probably holds people back from being successful is fear. And I think about, what do we fear? We tend to fear failure. And so we'll just use mass robotics as an example. When me and my co-founders were trying to get that started, there were a lot of naysayers. There were a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's not going to work. It's going to fail." Um, just a long list of reasons why we shouldn't be doing this. And I think that once you get comfortable with failure, you start to realize how powerful failure is. You start to realize that that's where you learn stuff. You can learn a little bit from a success, but you learn a lot more from a failure. It's sort of the boundaries. It's where everything happens. And so my success, I'd say, has come just by embracing failure. People look at all these things, say, "Oh, well, you've got all these successful companies, you've done so many things." But I would say that I've probably failed, maybe 10x more than the average person too. Right?
So it's something you've gotten comfortable with.
Yeah, well, and it's never really comfortable. That's part of the challenge is that even now, after having achieved some level of success, I still have that nervousness, that low-grade anxiety of, oh, what happens if this doesn't work, or what's next on the list, or how do I do this, or are people going to think I'm silly, or whatever. So I think it's really all about just being okay with that, sort of rolling around in it, and realizing that being uncomfortable is okay. And that's really where stuff happens when we're afraid to do something hard or challenging. You're not going to accomplish anything significant. I like to think that anything that creates significant value for humanity, right? Anything that really makes a difference, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to work at it. It's going to be something that has a lot of challenges, because if not, it would have been done already.
Makes total sense. So
Yeah.
you mentioned at Mass Robotics that you have this accelerator program, and maybe 100 robotics startups have gone through that program or are part of Mass Robotics. So besides the idea of, telling people that, you have to be prepared to fail, what other things are you telling some of these businesses? Do you address them? How do you support them?
Yeah. Well, so Mass Robotics really has 3 missions overall. One mission is to really help robotics companies be successful by having access to resources that are, somewhat unique to robotics in connected devices, AI companies. It all came about because I was trying to build robots, a couple decades ago. There were just a lot of challenges. Talk about, being comfortable with failure. There was just so many hard things. You have to have a machine shop. You have to build this hardware. You have to do all these different things, and you got to get this code for these sensors to work, and the list goes on. And especially when the robotics industry, mobile robotics industry, I should say, was very young, you had to basically do all that stuff yourself. And so part of the reason we decided to found Mass Robotics was this idea that we could help each other. it shouldn't be that hard to build a successful robotics company. So, make resources available to those companies. Let's share knowledge, which sensors work, hey, here's some code that we can share that makes getting data from this sensor easier. Let's not everybody have to, set up your own machine shop. Let's have a machine shop that we can all use and collaborate with each other on. Just lots of things like that. So, this idea of working together, I think, is really important. There's a concept that I first heard at a conference at MIT called pre-competitive collaboration. And it's interesting because, at the time, I felt like the robotics companies and industry, it was always very secretive. No one wanted to talk about what they were doing because they're afraid that somebody else would, get their great idea and do it too. Great ideas are a dime a dozen. Everybody has great ideas. And of course, everybody says, oh, well, that successful company, I thought of that first. That's great, but execution is what it's all about. You have to go after it. And the idea of working together to get further down that road quickly, I think really makes a lot of sense. So what do I mean by that? We should share more as businesses. When we've got whenever I figured something out, had a great idea, we really tried to promote it, be sort of a thought leader and share that information. So here's a good example of that. A couple of decades ago, when we were first trying to build our robotic forklifts, one of the things that I realized was that robots aren't perfect. Right? Ta-da, big surprise. No, robots are going to have challenges, right? They're not always going to work correctly. But going a little bit further than that, I realized, well, human workers run into problems too. So, I started building into our system this idea of what we now at Vecna Robotics call our PCC, our Pivotal Command Center. But basically, it was a call center where the robot could phone home and ask for help. It was really interesting at the time that most of the people in the industry really hated that idea. I was actually told a number of times that if my robots really worked, we wouldn't need that. If my robots really worked, we wouldn't need to give the robot the ability to phone home and ask for help, because obviously the robot would never need help. That hurt my feelings a little bit. But I realized that you had to be practical, right? If you're going to build a business, you have to be practical. You can't be sort of so prideful or have so much ego about what you're doing from an academic point of view. You've got to really, at the end of the day, just do what needs to be done. Sometimes I tell people cheat as much as you need to on the engineering side. But this was just a great example of where we were able to then start to educate the rest of the robotics community around this idea that, robots are going to need help from time to time. And if the robot could contact a human being and get the help they need, then you could start deploying robots in the real world in bigger numbers, because the customers are going to be getting a robot that gets the work done. The customer doesn't care that the robot's being helped by a human behind the scenes. They just care that they're getting the result they want. And that had a huge impact on the industry. As more and more companies started to adopt that approach, what we saw was that robots were being deployed in larger numbers, because now they actually could get the job done. They weren't sitting around waiting for somebody to, reset the robot or whatever. And that just made a huge difference. Anyway, that's just an example of this idea of sharing and working together as an industry to move things forward in a way that, doesn't happen if people aren't collaborating.
I couldn't agree more. And coming from someone who has spent some time in the forklift industry, the idea of having a robot that's smart enough to know that it needs help, might still be better than an individual human operator that may not opt to make that call for help. So I can imagine the advantages to that sort of approach. So
Yeah, it's just, and it saves so much money for the customers. There's still a lot of robots out there that when they have a problem, they just will sit brain dead until somebody realizes that the robot didn't show up. And then they'll have to, walk out on the factory floor or warehouse floor and try and find the robot. But this idea of the robot being smart enough to ask for help, just it really increases the ROI for our customers.
absolutely. And so as you talk about that, I assume we're talking about Vecna at this
Mm-hmm.
point, and maybe Twisted Fields as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, the idea really translates to all of them as, this was an idea that I bring to every robotic system I do, every robotic founder that I mentor. This is just such an important idea, which is, you know, do what you need to make the system work. And you got to think holistically, like what happens when something goes wrong? Because it's great when everything goes well. And I think this is one of the things that a lot of new founders don't think about as much. Like, oh, look, it worked perfectly. Yeah, but when you've deployed thousands of these things, just statistically speaking, stuff's going to happen. So you need to think very carefully about when stuff happens, how does it affect your customer?
What kind of reaction do you get from some of these young founders that they're starting their robotics businesses when they hear you talk about be prepared for these things to not work properly and think through the bigger picture?
It's interesting. I just did a seminar for the 10 robotics companies that are part of the Mass Robotics Accelerator. And it was really interesting because one of the company's founders, halfway through the presentation or seminar, it was very interactive. He raised his hand and he said, so when you were a young founder, our age, would you have listened to this advice and taken it? And I'm like,
What a
well,
great
no,
question.
probably not, because I thought I knew everything. But uh, you know, I think it's easy to be a little bit naive about how hard the real world is. You can develop some really cool robot or app in the lab, and you think you've really accomplished something amazing. But it's really, robustifying it, making it work reliably in the real world at scale. That's probably about 90% of the work. If you're lucky, it's probably, in reality, it's probably more like 99% of the work. That first demo in the lab that proves that it's possible is fun and it's cool, but it's really just the first teeny baby step.
Hmm.
Particularly now when you talk about building a business around it, right? Because now it not only needs to work, but it also needs to be it needs to provide an ROI for your customers. So it's got to save them money. You've got to actually be able to sell it for enough to make money on it. So there's just all these other really important considerations that just getting a cool demo to work just doesn't really address.
So you've got a couple of robotic hardware companies in Vecna and Twisted Fields. You have this nonprofit organization that's driving the future and culture of the robotics industry. But tell me about Mechable, your consulting firm, for just a minute. What you just
Yeah,
talked about, you talked about the business side of things a little bit, as well as some of the engineering challenges. So where do you focus with Mechable on and helping your clients? Is it more technical? Is it more business, or is it a blend?
well, it's a blend. But I felt like one of the biggest things that was holding back adoption of robotics was just that a lot of the end customers, they're not roboticists. They've got their business to run. And they don't understand the difference between a laboratory demo and, a system that can actually scale a lot of times. And oftentimes, what happens in particularly these bigger organizations is, the board says, "Oh, you guys need to automate. It's really important for our business that you automate." And so then the CEO will hire a chief automation officer or chief robotics officer or something like that, and they say, you need to go and automate, and they'll go out and they'll do these sort of pilot projects that most of the time fail. And if you ask yourself, why do they fail most of the time? I think it's because people often go after the sexy applications, or the thing that looks really cool, because they want to send that movie of that really cool humanoid robot doing something amazing back to the CEO to show that they've done some great work. But what we've found over the years is that the KISS principle is super important here. Keep it simple, smarty. Try and avoid saying stupid. Keep it simple, smarty.
Yeah.
Is a really valuable concept, because it's easy to get sucked into things that look really cool, but that's usually not where you're going to make your best return on investment as a business. It's the boring stuff. It's the repetitive stuff. It's really surprised me how oftentimes I see people spend a whole bunch of money, trying to find a robotic solution to solve a problem that's not really their cost driver. So Mechable does two things. One, we go in and we really help them to take a hard look at the business and identify those opportunities to apply mechanization, automation effectively. Like, where is it actually going to make a difference and not just be a cool science project? And then two, we help them on the technical side to really identify the right technologies to use, sort of how to plan out the project in a step-by-step way that's going to de-risk it. So, when we're involved, I think the project success rate just goes way, way up, because we've been doing this stuff a long time, and it's very obvious oftentimes when somebody's trying to do something that we've already tried and has failed in the past, that they don't need to waste their money on that. We can say, okay, this is why that's not a good idea. This is why that's not going to work. Been there, done that. But maybe consider this other approach. And yeah, it's really about just helping people to be successful at their in their automation journey. You can kind of think of it like, you're going to go climb Mount Everest. You're going to hire a Sherpa. The Sherpa's been there before. Sherpa also helps you with a lot of the, carrying your pack and, a lot of that stuff. That's kind of what Mechable does for people who are, trying to figure out their automation journey. We de-risk it. We help them to identify the projects that are going to be the most successful, long-term, short-term, and long-term, and also just really have a lot of fun doing it. And I think that's something that is a piece of advice that I really emphasize a lot, is you gotta have fun. You gotta be passionate about this stuff. Because if you're not interested in it, you're not going to do a great job. And that goes for entrepreneurs. That goes for people who have businesses that are trying to adopt automation solutions. It's really important to really have fun with it, because that's what engages all the parts of our brain that are great at creativity and problem solving.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who wants to show up to work to do something that you're not excited about anyway?
Last week, I spoke to some high school students in entrepreneurship classes, and I spoke to them about the exact same thing. I said, first of all, if you're going to start a business and you're going to be an entrepreneur, don't do it because you think you're going to make a lot of money. Do it because you're super passionate about it, and money will follow. Right.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate what you just said.
Yeah.
So I have
it's so
to,
true.
yeah. So I have to ask, on the heels of keeping it simple, Smarty, and not necessarily always going for the sexy thing, I got to ask, I mean, robotics is everywhere now, right? It's solving so many problems. What can you tell us about, because you see so much, from, in terms of
Mhm.
the robotics industry. Can you tell us something about that might blow the minds of viewers and listeners in terms of where robotics may be going next without giving away something that somebody would be upset about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know the types of activities that robots are going to be able to do is really accelerating very rapidly. We were sort of held back in the past just by lack of compute. Meaning that the computers that you could have on a robot just weren't quite fast enough, and so the robot wasn't, able to do anything other than run pretty simple programming. But you've heard of Moore's law.
Yeah.
Moore's law is the idea that the number of transistors on a piece of silicon would basically double every 18 months to 2 years, and so that means that our ability to process information is sort of going up exponentially. So this has been something that's really benefited the robotics industry, particularly around machine vision and those type of things. So robotic systems are able to see and identify objects far, far better than ever before. It used to be that when we were picking up a pallet, for example, that you would just have to kind of know where the pallet was on a map and then sort of blindly drive to that spot with your forks at the right height and then kind of hope that the pallet was there and everything went well. um, uh, and that's what most of the industry was doing for many years. But one of the first areas that we applied AI, I'm air quoting because it's not my favorite term, but artificial intelligence, was that we would actually look for and see the palette, and have the robot dynamically make a plan to pick up that pallet. Now, this is kind of an easy example right now, but the idea that the robot could actually see and recognize that the pallet was a thing that it understood how to interact with, and then could go and pick it up reliably. It just opened up so many doors that made it possible for the robots to work in situations that were far more dynamic, and sort of chaotic, realistic even, than before. So that same process is accelerating. So robots are going to be able to just interact with so many more types of things. Almost lost it there.
All good.
In intelligent ways. And we've got a lot of hype around humanoid robotics. I love humanoid robotics. They're just really cool and amazing, and are going to, and we're seeing just a broad range of capabilities that, just even a few years ago were considered very, very researchy. That doesn't necessarily mean that, the humanoid robot is the right solution for your business problem. Again, going to the whole cost side of things.
Right.
But one application I'm really excited about right now is around case picking. So case picking is this idea of in these big warehouses, they'll have these pallets full of boxes basically that have different products on them. And how do all those products get to your local Walmart or Target, or you name it? It's because a human being drives a forklift around, goes to each pallet, hops off, picks up, the shampoo or the, whatever product that they need to deliver to that store. And it's just sort of backbreaking work. So one of the things we've done now at Vecna Robotics is we have a case picking application for the robotics side of things that really allows it to be 2x as efficient as it used to be. Now, this is sort of one of those keep it simple things where it's not necessarily the sexiest application, right? We don't have a humanoid robot making sushi, but it's one of those areas where it just has a huge impact on our efficiency. It allows humans to be humans, right? Humans to do what humans are good at, and it allows the robots to do the boring, dull um, uh, stuff that robots are good at.
Yeah, and for
So I
everybody
think
who goes
there's,
to the store and sees empty shelves and gets frustrated, well, there's a
yeah,
solution. There's a way that the logistics are going to keep that moving a whole lot faster, right? And get those stores filled up.
yeah, yeah. So I think that there's, I'd like to think about it as two main paths. The sort of really cool, what can a robot do side of things is going to continue to just amaze us. You have robots doing backflips and juggling and playing ping pong and going to Mars, and all these amazing things are happening. But the other side of it is, where are we really going to see the massive impact? It's going to be the large number of robots getting deployed because they're doing something that's pretty straightforward and they can do it robustly.
Nice. So, Daniel, last question for me. You have all of these organizations and companies, all with the exception of, looks like one, located here in New England. So, what has being in New England meant for you and all of these businesses and organizations?
Yeah, New England is an amazing place, particularly for robotics. I think the combination of um, uh, just really great pedigree in computers and computer science, but when you combine that with New England's unique manufacturing history, it's just made for a really great place. And then, of course, the access to the academic resources, the engineering schools is just unparalleled. Um, I think New England is incredibly unique in the world when it comes to sort of being this epicenter of all things necessary for making robotics successful. Um, and I think that's a big part of the reason why mass robotics is so successful. People realize that that's the place to be to do robotics. And there's great robotics going on all over the world, obviously, but I really like to look at the fact that so many of these innovations, came out of New England, and yeah, it's just such a rich environment with so much talent. It's a great place to be a robotics company.
Well, Daniel, you've been an absolutely fantastic guest today. So for everybody listening again, our guest is Daniel Theobald. I'm going to call you Mr. Robotics, or maybe the Robotics Sherpa, based on the story that you told earlier. But in all sincerity, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been fantastic gaining your perspective on all things robotics here in New England. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right. And for everybody watching and listening, thanks very much. We'll be back with another episode soon. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.